It is an important part of the puzzle, but it's not the only thing. You have to kind of balance what innovations, what modernizations do I want to take advantage of? What is my downtime requirements? Is cloud part of that? Are there other things I want to do, other innovations I want to do concurrently with that? You need to look at the whole picture.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is the time we meet for our podcast interviews, which generally happens on Friday between 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern, depending upon the availability of the guest as well as the time zone. So today we have a very exciting guest. I'll let him introduce himself. But for now, just some points from the logistics perspective that we have had very exciting guests. Last week, we had Brian Jackson from Infotech Research. And if you have not checked his episode, you might want to go back and check. We have discussed so many different technology trends and how that is going to impact you in 2025. And today we are going through a slightly more nuts and bolts conversation related to SAP S/4HANA architecture and a lot of things that are happening in the SAP S/4HANA portfolio. We are going to be bringing more guests next week as well, so stay tuned for those episodes. On that note, Steels, I'm going to hand over the mic to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for having me, and welcome everybody. And I'm very, very thankful to be here. My name is Steel Arbini. I am Chief Technology Officer of a company called SNP. We are headquartered in Heidelberg, Germany. I particularly am based in the US. As Chief Technology Officer, that makes my primary responsibility the software products of SNP. And we are what you would consider a tech-enabled services software company, kind of both offering both software and services. And I have been myself in the enterprise software space for over 30 years, doing ERP and enterprise software projects basically across many different industries, from financial services, aerospace, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, and so on. So hopefully we can bring some of that experience to your audience, and with Sam's help, I'm sure he'll guide me to the right place.
Happy to, and again, welcome, Steel, and super excited to hear about the stories as well as the experiences. And I don't know where I was getting extra S in your name. I was calling you Steels. Maybe I don't know if you have any sort of affiliation with the Steelers. I'm still hung up on that, I guess. So welcome again, Steel. And if you're in the audience joining for the first time, make sure you guys post questions, comments, and maybe if you can mention your location where you are joining from. Always like to get a gauge on where people are from. And we are going to incorporate your comments and stories as we follow up the conversation. On that note, Steel, I'm probably going to start with the first question that is generally given for every single guest, because that is also the theme of the podcast, which is going to be just the overall perspective on business growth. What do you think of business growth, Steel, when you think of that?
I think, generally speaking, across the economy, it looks good. Of course, industries will vary, right? And that's, also the sign of a resilient economy. There could be a problem in the airlines, but manufacturing is strong. There could be a problem in manufacturing, but banking is strong. As long as it all doesn't have a problem at the same time, we'll generally be okay. And one thing that we look at S&P is the interest rate and the, financing landscape, because that is really also going to be a driver for growth, right? We see a lot of pent up demand, for example, in the M&A space due to the high interest rates. People are looking for creative ways to finance some of these deals. And with rates coming in and maybe even further coming in this year, we believe a lot of that pent up demand will be released. And that has benefits across the economy because it drives a lot of work. People are selling underperforming businesses, buying higher performing ones, restructuring, getting lean and mean, and so on. So it bodes well for the economy, I believe.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. I think the whole M&A market, as well as the deal flow, has been a little silent, I would say, for last couple of years.
Yes.
And the activity is definitely picking up right now. Now that the interest rates are down, I don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, it's sort of uncertain the market, but hopefully things will open up. I mean, that's good for everybody, I guess.
I think it
Uh,
needs to come in a bit more still. If you think it's 7, 8% around there somewhere, it becomes difficult. Some companies don't have even margins that big, so
yeah.
you don't even, you're in the hole before you even started.
Crazy times, I can tell you that. I mean, it's not easy for anybody, whether you talk about businesses or individuals, and then you have so many disruptions happening in the world. It's not easy.
Yes, yes.
On that note, I mean, that's probably a good segue of getting into our topic, which is going to be SAP S for HANA. I think that's what you're passionate about. Obviously, our audience cares for most of the ERP ecosystems, I would say. Obviously, SAP S for HANA is one of the largest market share, for people. They are definitely interested in hearing about that. And my understanding of your work, Steel, is that you operate in a lot of high volume industries, and those have very interesting and unique needs. So I definitely want to understand a little bit more in terms of, number one, the unique challenges that you are seeing in the high volume industries, and maybe layer in your SAP S4 HANA a little bit, whether it's a fit, not fit, or how do you make it a fit, I guess.
Sure, sure. No, great question, Sam. What we see is that a lot of simpler systems, simpler SAP landscapes, they have already moved to S/4HANA because it was going to be pretty easy for them. They could maybe tolerate downtime. They didn't have a lot of data, or
Yeah,
maybe not a lot of regulatory requirements that they needed to keep. So those guys moved already. So who's left, right? It's the monsters out there
yeah,
that really are having a challenging time moving what we like to call getting the elephant through the eye of the needle, right? How do they move this massive high volume system? Could literally be 50, 100 or more terabytes. You think
yeah,
about the data volume
yeah,
that needs to move to S4HANA and may have to, in addition to just move, may have to go to the cloud,
yeah,
may need other conversion and adoption of new features in S4HANA as
yeah,
well. All this has to happen now.
yeah,
And it becomes quite difficult. So those are the guys that are kind of, I don't want to call them laggards, but
yeah,
have been reluctant to bite the bullet on this because of some of these requirements. They have highly regulated industries. So for
yeah,
example, they need to bring all that data because it's the history that they need to prove their compliance, be it
yeah,
aerospace, banking, financial services, chemicals. They all have those similar type of historical
yeah,
requirements for compliance, uh, as well as highly customized business processes
yeah,
that they need going forward, right? Like you take finance. Everybody could go to standard finance, right?
yeah,
There's no reason you need customized accounts payable reporting, right? Right? It's like it comes in the system. If you can't deal with that, there's probably something wrong. However, manufacturing in
yeah,
aerospace, I could justify a very highly customized process there. People need to keep that. They want to adopt S/4HANA. They want to modernize. They want to be on the new platform. They want to take advantage of all the predictive analytics and all those great things we've been told. But there are certain things they can't change. So these are the people that we're dealing with right now. And add into that kind of part of your subject there is about downtime minimization. This becomes critical. Every organization knows their cost of downtime because
yeah,
it's how they do their disaster recovery planning.
yeah,
That's how they can justify, do I need a hot backup? Well, that costs me $1 million a month. Is my cost of downtime more than that? So then it justifies it, right? So they all know this, right? And you can easily see the cost of downtime running, into 7, 8 digits easily, and it becomes, downtime minimization becomes another key aspect of this. So that's another part of the puzzle. I don't want to overstress that. It is an important part of the puzzle, but it's not the only thing. You have to kind of balance what innovations, what modernizations do I want to take advantage of? What is my downtime requirements? Is cloud part of that? Are there other things I want to do, other innovations I want to do concurrently with that? You need to look at the whole picture.
Okay, so very interesting argument there. And, I have been doing this for a while now. We have produced a few or 600 episodes.
Sure.
And, one of the things that we have not heard that people don't even pay attention to be completely honest, okay? When they are looking for any sort of ERP workload migration, they are probably going to be worried about, hey, I'm looking at on-prem versus cloud. Okay, what is going to be my transition? There are so many different factors, right? But one thing that we have not heard that you are talking here is data size, which is very new. Okay, so why is data size important for any sort of ERP migration? Why should people think about it? Why does it even matter? I mean, let's say if I'm the CFO and I'm trying to migrate, I just don't understand because I don't probably have the traditional IT background. So why is data size important?
It's a very good question, Sam. And ultimately, you can't violate the laws of physics, right?
Yeah,
The
exactly.
the infrastructure that you have,
Okay.
be it completely on-prem or
Yeah.
cloud, it
Yeah.
really doesn't matter at this high level we're talking.
Yeah.
There is a limit to how fast it can process data, right? Maybe it's 100 megabytes a second, maybe it's 50 megabytes a second. It
Yeah.
might be more or less.
Yeah.
But then it becomes a simple division problem
Yeah.
to figure out how long it's going to take to process all of that data. And then so now you have time.
Yeah.
And you can look and say, okay, back to that question of cost of downtime.
Yeah.
Is this level of disruption acceptable? And by the way, we see many customers that we do this math with them, they do
Yeah.
this math also, and they'll say, "Oh, it's purely comfortable and reasonable for us to fit this in a weekend,
Yeah.
and it's okay for us. So we don't need downtime minimization techniques because there is effort and cost associated with them.
Yeah.
We can manage a weekend. No worries. Let's do that." Now, there are others that don't. For example, we're working with a very large, if not the largest software provider globally, who also runs a very high volume online store where
Yeah.
your kids buy those video games all
Yeah.
day and all night. Now, they can tolerate minimal downtime there
Yeah.
because there is a known cost to that. They know their transactional volume.
Yeah.
They know how the remediation that they'd have to put in to manage that, what the
Yeah.
downtime is going to cost them.
Yeah.
So they need ultimately single digit hours of downtime for a system in the triple digit terabyte range. Now, this is not so easy, right? Because now you're talking about an outlier system,
Yeah.
tremendous data volume. You're
Yeah.
not going to make this in a weekend. So now you're not even going to make this in a week,
Yeah.
right? With a traditional migration. So a week downtime is not even open for discussion, right? So it has to take downtime minimization requirements. So you'll see a lot of these high volume 24/7 operations uh, are must have downtime minimization.
Okay, so very interesting. So I'm actually going to keep, peeling layers because I'm really interested in this conversation right now. So one comment that you made is about laws of physics, right? So when you talk about the laws of physics, when it comes to the ERP installations, and I don't know how many people really understand that there are a lot of constraints with any ERP implementation, any sort of software implementation. Especially with SaaS, people are thinking that this is some sort of magic wand. I'm gonna pick this.
There's no magic. There's no magic.
No
That's the
magic,
thing you
right?
have to
So,
learn.
so tell us some laws of physics that matter, for ERP migrations, I guess.
Okay. If you're thinking about on-prem, meaning your source system and your target S/4HANA system are all on-prem, all in the data center,
Yeah.
there are like four main things you need to consider. You need to consider your disk performance. You probably have a SAN, right? And there is some limit to how fast the storage can read and write data.
Yeah.
And since it's all on prem and these SANs are highly optimized
Yeah.
nowadays, it's probably in the hundreds of megabytes per second range. So that's one constraint that you're going to be up against. You cannot go to the theoretical maximum. The next will be CPU.
Yeah.
How much CPU can your system absorb? CPU utilization, can it absorb until it reaches 100%?
Yeah.
Then, of course, there is network, because you're going to be pushing this data through the network.
Yeah.
If you have gigabit Ethernet, right, you can transmit 1 gigabit of information per second. Now, that's the theoretical maximum. In reality, you get a little bit less than that,
Yeah.
but that's another wall you're going to be up against. And then you have like memory constraints.
Yeah.
How much memory do you have, and what is the memory bandwidth? And as you're running a process that takes a long amount of time, one of those things, at least one, will
Yeah.
be saturated, will be at 100%.
Yeah.
And that will be your limiting factor, right? Think about it, if everything could run with infinite capacity,
Yeah.
every time you hit enter, the job would be done, right? But if it takes longer, one
Yeah.
of those four things is running at 100%,
Yeah.
and therefore it can't go any faster. Now, the cloud or another data center
Yeah.
adds another constraint. It really stresses the network constraint,
Yes.
because in most cases I'm pushing that data out over a WAN now, which is
Yeah.
usually the weakest link in the infrastructure. And by weakest, I mean slowest. So you're probably going to saturate the WAN, which might be, if you think of the storage in hundreds of megabytes per second, the WAN might be in megabytes or tens of megabytes per second. So it's orders of magnitude less than the other elements of the infrastructure. So that's going to be your limiting factor. And again, that will be the thing hitting 100% that's going to slow down the whole operation. So you can't get around that. So how do we minimize downtime? If we're up against an immovable object, how do we pass that? Well, how can we, the question becomes, Sam, how can we get creative here? How can we play tricks? And I don't want to use negative connotation there of a trick there. How can we outsmart
Yeah.
the hardware and those limiting factors and get around that and still meet our downtime requirement? For example, we're going to think about how can we split the migration into an uptime portion
Yeah.
and a downtime portion.
Yeah.
So now, as that example of the customer I told you who could go live in the whole weekend, you're doing the whole migration in the downtime. System's off, right, as far as users are concerned, and we're doing the migration, no
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
But if I can split it in uptime migration, I can certainly migrate a lot of data that's not changing. Think of a system has 10 years of historical data in there. I doubt very highly the data from 2014 is changing much, and 2015 and 2016. So there's a large chunk of data
Yeah.
that I can migrate in the uptime. While the system is still running, users are doing their daily job, I'm migrating that data, and that gets the lion's share over to the new S/4HANA system.
Yeah.
And then I can take a much smaller downtime window, what I'll call the catch-up period, where we'll just bring over anything that's changed, let's say new information or any changes that's been made to existing information in that downtime window. So let's say we did a 1 week uptime migration, brought over 99 of those 100 terabytes. So now in the downtime portion, I just got to migrate that 1 terabyte that changed, and hopefully that can fit into my downtime window. And then I'm able to achieve the downtime that I want. If that makes sense.
Okay, so very interesting. So I'm going to have a lot of clarifying questions there,
Good.
if you don't mind, so that
I love
audience can follow along as well, right? So obviously, when people look at, and you mentioned both scenarios, I can relate with on-prem, but when you look at any sort of systems, okay, their expectation is going to be that, okay, I'm using some sort of Facebook or LinkedIn. I mean, that's how people think. Most people, I mean, business people, So why do we have this thing called process bottleneck? Is it some sort of one-time activity, the migration that you are performing, or do I need to worry about these process bottlenecks, throughout the process, or do I need to make any sort of considerations? The kind of workloads that you're talking about, obviously, they are probably at Fortune 100 level. They have very different needs, very different requirements. So, what are we talking about here? I mean, in terms of the process bottleneck, laws of physics, are we talking about just one-time activity from the migration perspective, or do we need to plan anything from the transactional perspective as well?
Well, look, I mean, you have to. It's a great point. How did you get here in the first place? Is
Yeah,
really, I think, the question that you're asking. Why do I even have this problem?
yeah,
And usually, it's because, like, how do you get 100 terabytes of data, right? It's not. That's not 1 year's worth of information. That's many years of data at a
yeah,
very high volume that you've kept.
yeah,
Now, okay, why have you kept it? That's the question. You may have kept it because you're obligated to. You might have legal and regulatory compliance type requirements that you have to keep that. For example, aerospace, right? Or pharma, right?
yeah,
They need to be able to go back sometimes to aircraft manufactured 30, 40 years ago to look up spare parts, warranty information, testing data, all of that manufacturing information. Where is all of that? That's all in ERP. So they have to keep that. They have to keep it. Additionally, other reasons that might lead you to keep it is sometimes organizations want it for the analytics benefit,
yeah,
right? If you want to do predictive analytics, the new buzzword, right? Everybody wants
yeah,
AI now, right?
yeah,
Well, how does AI learn what to do? How does it get trained?
yeah,
By giving it history,
yeah,
right? So we look back at all the historical data, the last 5, 10 years, whatever is predictive for us,
yeah,
and we say, okay, what how did the sales perform, what regions perform better, can we correlate that to the weather and the
yeah,
product line, and we come up with a model which is really just an equation,
yeah,
right, that is designed to predict future behavior. Without that historical information to train the model, my AI doesn't work. So that's another reason people are keeping it, both for AI use cases and old school analytics, OLAP type reporting. And maybe a less uh, nice reason or less a positive reason people keep it is many times it's difficult to make the decision to get rid of it, right? To archive it, right? Because now you're telling somebody, maybe a business person, the IT department is saying, okay, we're going to cut you off at 5 years of history. And they're like, no, no, I might need that. So the always the first inclination is to hold on to all that
yeah,
stuff, like kind of like storing the junk and you just keep putting it in the garage. But one day, like when you need to move, what do you wind up? You wind up throwing all that stuff away anyway, right?
yeah,
So you kept it all those years for nothing.
yeah,
And it's kind of similar to that. So there could be a lot of things that led to that problem.
yeah,
Lack of housekeeping, right? Legal and regulatory
yeah,
requirements, need for it for analytics, and more that have led you to hold on to that data. Uh, and by the way, there are some customers with very high volume, like in the pharma distribution business.
yeah,
There's 2 or 3 very high flying companies there. We all know who they are. They're in the hundreds of terabytes,
yeah,
and they do a lot of archiving. It's just their volume is so unbelievably high
yeah,
that even with 2, 3 years of history, they're still breaking 100 plus terabytes. Those online music stores you see, right,
yeah,
that you get with your phone, you know who they
yeah,
are, right?
yeah,
Uh, Again, they have that kind of volume and they archive all their data because the amount of volume through there, every time you buy an app or buy a song in
yeah,
their store, it generates a sales order in SAP. Could you imagine the volume of sales orders that you have? It's
yeah,
inconceivable, right? And
yeah.
this is what's leading to that. And they need that for at least a year, let's say, or two. So even with that minimal requirement of data
Yeah.
retention, it still grows astronomically.
Yeah, so great insight. So I'm actually going to provide, some understanding from my perspective, and then you can provide,
Great.
your insights if I'm heading in the right direction or not. And most likely my audience is going to have very similar questions as well, because my audience is slightly more business, audience. They are not as technical, still, as you know, right? So here, obviously, in terms of the data, there are always going to be 2 or 3 different types of data sets with any ERP, right? So you are going to have some sort of transactional data. You are going to have the historical data. And I believe the data set that you are talking about, is primarily the historical data that you need to bring in for the downtime. If you are trying to, I don't know if this is going to be one-time activity, or do you need to bring all of that, all the time. So that's one point, right? Then you have the other point, I guess, overall from the data maintenance perspective, is that the whole issue about the architecture, right? So let's say if you go 10, 20 years back in the ECC world, you had plain vanilla ERP, and then you didn't have as much architectural complications, I would say, right? But now in 2024, in my mind, SAP S4 HANA is not just ERP, it's the whole enterprise architecture, and they are focusing a lot more overall, on the enterprise architecture. So you have a lot of systems, and now I don't know if SAP S4 HANA as of today, contains some sort of data warehouse. I mean, I don't know how you interpret SAP S4 HANA, because each customer installation is going to be slightly different, right? So generally, in your experience, when you are bringing this data, are you dumping inside the core ERP layer, or are you dumping that inside slightly more data warehouse layer? Where things are going to be easier, because migrating historical data inside the ERP was never easy. In fact, I mean, nobody was really migrating the historical data unless there is the absolute need. Otherwise, they would never do that, and they will probably put it inside data warehouse. So maybe provide some more context there. What's going on here, based on my commentary, if I'm heading in the right direction or not, Steve?
Sure. You're right. There is tremendous difficulty to
Yeah,
migrate historical data, but the root cause there is technical, right?
yeah,
It's a difficult technical problem, because think about ERP, right? You have an open period. We're open now in the
yeah,
month of October. So all my transactional data that I do today
yeah,
is in the month of October. I can't post anything into the closed periods. So this is the limitation that stops me from bringing over historical data. Okay, at S&P we have a software that allows us to do that, right? So that allows us to bring the historical data, and this opens up the new area for the customer. Oh, you mean I can bring the historical data? Because this helps me, right? Because think about what's in that history, right?
yeah,
Customer calls you with a warranty, just as an example. Do you want to be able to find that, right? I mean, you don't want to know, do I have to look here? Do I have to look in my data warehouse? Which data warehouse do I have
yeah,
to look at it in?
yeah,
It becomes very difficult. You want to
yeah,
be able to find that in ERP.
yeah,
And there are many other reasons besides warranties. It could be discounts, it could be compliance reasons, it could be spare parts reasons. There's a lot of reasons why you want that historical data. Maybe not all of it. As we said before, there's
yeah,
reasons to get rid of some of it, but you certainly want a decent amount of it. Uh, Also, because you want to ultimately retire that old system. You
yeah,
don't want to say, we brought only open items
yeah,
and we retire, and we're going to keep the old system for our historical reporting. You
yeah,
actually didn't simplify anything, you made it more complicated. So we would like you to retire that system. We'd
yeah,
like you to decommission it,
yeah,
keep it kind of on ice, so to speak. You can refer to it if you need to on low cost storage, but you can't transact business there anymore. There's no need to pay the full ERP license and so on. You just have the data in case you get a audit type question, you have a place to refer to it. So when it comes now to the migration, we want to bring as much data as needed to meet the customer's regulatory requirement. And we're going to talk to the auditors, we're going to talk to the customer, we're going to talk to the lines of business to understand what that is. And maybe it's something like 5 to 7 years is a number we hear a lot.
yeah,
So, okay, now what do we do with 7 years and older or 5 years and older data?
yeah,
Well, we can just decommission the whole source. That's one option people say. So everything untouched is in the a read-only image of the source at much lower cost.
yeah,
Number two, we could bring it to many of the data warehouse type third-party data stores that are out there, and you know them all. There's a
yeah,
bunch of them out there. SAP even has DataSphere. We could bring it in there as well, right?
yeah,
There are many things customers can do with that data to get it out of core ERP, but still be able to access it. And that's a second option. But we do want them to come back to that point to consider bringing a certain amount of it. And I'll tell you why. Back to that AI predictive analytics
yeah,
discussion. When you talk to a customer, Sam, why do you want to go to S/4HANA? Well, the first example is, well, there's some date and we want to be compliant and all
Yeah.
that. Okay, okay. I'd rather you didn't do that. Better go get third party support
Yeah.
and don't do it for some arbitrary date.
Yeah.
You peel the onion on that, I'll use your term there, and you finally get to something like, well, we want to become a digital business. We want to take advantage of the predictive analytics that are in S/4HANA, and that's really why we want to do it. Now, that's a good reason. That's
Yeah.
something I'm on board with, not some arbitrary date. Okay, how do predictive analytics work, right? How does S/4HANA know, Sam, that you're going to buy pencils next month? It's because you bought pencils every month for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So without that historical data, the model doesn't know that you're going to do the thing, buy pencils in my silly example,
Yeah.
next month. And this is much more important than buying pencils. I'm just keeping it silly. But it could be, is the machine going to break? Do I need
Yeah.
to order spare parts? Is the
Yeah.
customer going to order something? Are they not going to order? So all this stuff you want to know
Yeah.
doesn't work without the historical data. So what does this mean? The reason, your justification for buying the platform in the first place,
Yeah.
you've deferred for another 5 years. This is not a good example. It doesn't
Yeah.
unlock the value in the platform. So migrating the history
Yeah.
allows you to unlock the value in S/4HANA.
Yeah, so very interesting insights there, and I'm going to rehash some more there, and so that you can provide more insights. So one of the things that you mentioned is that obviously you don't want to bring everything, right? You want to be selective about what you are bringing because things get really hard. And when I say things get really hard, meaning it might feel as if you are playing the game of dependencies when it comes to ERP, and it might feel almost cyclical. When you're bringing this data set, okay, I'm bringing my dependency, I'm bringing my warranty, and warranty is dependent upon what? Okay, and that is going to have four
Happens
or five
often.
different customer and account and bank account, and
Yep.
now you are probably you found that for one financial period, and that is going to have dependency on some other items that then exists back then. So what do? I mean, do you create all of that? I mean, that's a long process, right? And the second point that I'm going to make is that, okay, if you are going to be selective and you are saying that, okay, I'm actually going to put my predictive engine on top of that, but the data is going to be incomplete because you were selective to begin with, right? So you are not going to have the complete data set. So I don't know if you are going to find the insights that you are looking for. So and I don't know, again, what is the justification here, whether you want to put it inside ERP versus the data warehouse, because in data warehouse you are going to have far easier life. You don't have to follow all of these rules. You can have whatever data structure that you like, and you can dump it there and have far more reliable insights than doing it in the ERP layer. What do you think of that? Any thoughts there by any chance?
Well, certainly in the data warehouse layer,
Yeah.
now you have to build something,
Yeah.
right? Because now you need a cube or
Yeah.
something to store that. You have to do all that data warehouse design. You're going to need
Yeah.
multiple cubes, right?
Yeah.
One for sales orders, one for purchasing, one for manufacturing, one for distribution, and on and on.
Yeah.
And then you need a whole reporting layer on top of that.
Yeah.
So this is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Part of the reason you do that, if you
Yeah.
think about really why do a lot of organizations use a third party reporting platform,
Yeah.
it's because they can't get the data out of ERP to begin with. This is a failure, right? But you should be able to, right? This is
Yeah.
the reason you bought the platform. A lot of those reports, analytics, and so on are built into the platform. You should really try to take advantage of that. Think about, I don't want to sound like I'm I'm shilling for SAP right now, but they'll tell you in purchasing, we went out and hired the industry's leading procurement experts and built that intelligence into S/4HANA. Oh, you really want to reinvent that? Why are you paying all that money for SAP to go rebuild something that they supposedly had the world's leading experts do for them? And that's just procurement. It's the same in distribution and real estate and transportation and plant maintenance and on and on. So you prefer not to do that if you don't have to, because it's a huge undertaking. Now, your other point about how do you bring the data over with integrity, and this is another point that makes the historical data very, very difficult. Why it's always fails in the past. And by the way, how we address it differently, right? If you think about it, as you're migrating at the database level, database tables, it's very easy, as you said, to bring over one data set and not bring over another, like bring over the sales orders, but forget to bring over the customers. Now you have sales orders with no customers on them and nothing works, right? You try to open them up, they
Yep.
error out, and you totally messed everything up. This is why historical data migration is nearly impossible.
Yep.
Okay? What S&P has done is we have built what we call transformation content, ERP aware content into our migration software so that when you say, I want to migrate these sales orders, the customers that belong with them come over with integrity. The whole business entity that represents that sales order, which might be many hundreds of tables
Yep.
at 10 levels deep of nested hierarchy, is brought over. It's like pulling the thread, right? You pull the one thread and everything connected to it, dependent, has to come across. And we always say we don't migrate data. What we migrate is a running business. And in order to do that, exactly like you said, when you bring the sales orders, the payments, the deliveries, the customers, the
Yep.
items, all this has to come, or else it doesn't work, right? You're going to go try to receive a payment on it in the
Yep.
system, and it's going to fail. And now you have a big problem, right? An AR clerk can't receive the payment, and now the customers aren't there, and you're totally broken. And by the way, you can't receive that payment in the data warehouse, right? Because that needs to go into the balance sheet, and it affects a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So you can't do that in the data warehouse anyway. That needs to be in the live system.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point, and so I need some more clarifications there, if you don't mind. So that is going to be the way you are bringing the data, and you are saying that, what, I have this transformation layer. My understanding of 90% of the ERP systems that we have in the market, and I don't know if there are any sort of changes. Maybe you can talk about that as well. ECC versus S4 HANA architecture. But for the most part, my understanding was that these relationships will be enforced at the database level. If you are bringing a sales order, and if the customer is not there, database should not be able to, you will not be able to import that, I guess. So
Actually, not. You'd be surprised. It's not.
interesting. Okay, so is it in S4 HANA, or is it ECC as well? Do you know
ECC and S4HANA both
both of them?
enforce that. And by the way, not just SAP,
Huh.
Oracle, EBS, JD Edwards, and on. It's enforced in the application layer, right?
Interesting.
Meaning the SAP screens, when you hit
Yeah.
save, does
Yeah.
that check in the logic. There's none of those, what you're saying, foreign key relationships
Yeah.
built into the database level. Why? Because they incur significant overhead, right? They incur significant overhead because how are they enforced? They're enforced through indexes, right?
Yeah.
So now this might be too much in the technology. And, what do you want? You want your ERP fast, right? We want it fast. We want to hit
Yeah.
enter, and we want the save to be done right away. So
Yeah.
in order to achieve that,
Yeah.
all that referential integrity that you're talking about
Yeah.
is pushed up to the application layer. It's not at the database layer. So
Huh.
you can certainly bring sales orders without customers. You can do that if you were to make such a big mistake. We would
Yeah.
prefer you didn't, but it's possible. This is why that type of migration is extremely difficult. And we've invested over 30 years to build that ERP aware content. And that's what allows us to do this type of migration.
Very interesting. So we have some comments from the audience, so I'm going to touch on
Please.
some of those. So Ashish, by the way, Ashish is a great guy. You guys should follow him. So he is saying great point. Some folks have leveraged archiving, keeping retention policy in perspective, and keeping 2-3 years data online, while the rest could go offline on cold storage, but retrievable for reporting on demand. Although the solutions from open text, etc., are costly and becomes a deterrent for many mid-sized to small organizations, and choose to keep everything online. Very detailed comment. Again, Ashish is very insightful in general. So I don't know, Steel, do you have any sort of comments, thoughts there on this comment?
No, thank you for that, Ashish. It's a great comment, and it's true. I kind of played it down a little bit, but you'd be surprised how many organizations just don't archive. They just don't do it. Like it's an afterthought. They let it build up as they're thinking about it. Disk. It's relatively cheap nowadays, so they throw more hardware at the problem so that they don't have to make that tough decision, right? Because the business generally wants to avoid that because they're not sure what next thing might be thrown at them that they might need that for. So they're reluctant to say, give me 5 years. It's like keeping the stuff in the garage. And that's what we see in Ashish's point a lot is that they're deferring that. And yeah, there are costly ways to deal with it, but it's just kick the can down the road for a while. And I give you just a brief example. We were working with a large insurance company, and they generate tremendous transactional volume. Every claim, every inquiry, every call becomes a transactional data element in ERP. Now they go to modernize to S/4HANA, and they realize they're going to need a 2-year archiving project just to get the data set down to a size that's manageable to migrate to S/4HANA because they never did the archiving. They never bothered to do it. It was just throw more storage at it. We worry about it later. Now they couldn't even get a HANA box big enough to handle the amount of data they had. So they needed a 2-year archiving project. This is, unfortunate. Now, luckily with selective migration, we were able to tell them you don't need to do any of that. We'll bring you 5 years of financial and procurement data. We'll bring you 7 years of claims data, leave everything else behind, selectively migrate that into your ERP system, into your S/4HANA target. And guess what? You saved yourself a 2-year archiving project. And even more important, you get the benefit of S/4HANA right away. You didn't defer those reasons you wanted to go to S/4HANA for 2 years till you did the archiving project. You were able to selectively migrate and you get the benefit right away. So, there's ways, again, like I said, there's no violating the laws of physics, but we're going to look for creative ways to get around it. And selective migration is another way that you can certainly reduce that data volume and kind of, pay for those sins of the past of not archiving.
Yeah, so very interesting insights there. And Ashish, if you have any sort of follow-up comments there, if you're still listening, please post them. We are always curious about, comments from the audience, and we always like to create this whole three-way conversation. That's what makes it fun. Anybody else has any other
Yeah,
comments
yeah.
related to this, please post them. Okay, so I'm going to have one very loaded question for you, okay?
Uh-oh.
And, that's going to be slightly surprise for you because
Aren't they
obviously
all
we'll
loaded? I don't know.
we'll find out, I guess, how you are. But I'm really looking for, your insights in terms of what you think future direction of ERP. So, I don't know how familiar you are with the platforms such as your Smartsheet, Monday.com, Airtable. I don't know whether you have used them or not, but they are right now almost like $1 billion ARR. They are adopted very, very well. People love it because they are easy to use, right? And one of the concept that they are promoting is this whole notion of no schema database and no schema software. Meaning, at the database level, you're not going to have any sort of referential integrity. Now, if you go back to analyze, okay, what was the difference between QuickBooks and SAP? And sometimes people sort of struggle to answer that question. Okay, and one of the reasons is going to be that QuickBooks, you don't have any sort of referential integrity. And that's why SAP is so powerful because you are enforcing a lot of rules at the database level. Now, to your comment, that okay, that now we don't have that referential integrity at the database level, inside the ERP. So do you believe that Smartsheet, Airtable, is probably going to become an ERP, or can you write ERP inside those? That is number one. And number two is going to be that okay, now AI can write code, and people are arguing that AI can probably create your ERP as well. If AI can create an ERP, and my counter generally with that is that database programming is very different in general. Okay, you require a lot more things that your AI cannot do, and that's what makes ERP so powerful. But you are saying that now things are different from the ERP perspective. Even ERPs don't have that data integrity enforced. So number one, can these platforms catch up, such as your Smartsheet, etc., and can AI write ERP or not?
Well, I want to make sure I was clear. They have data integrity enforced, but it's at the application layer. It's not at the database layer, right? Meaning it's not done by foreign keys.
Yeah.
It's done by the application logic. Like, so for example, I save a sales order. It's going to look up and verify that the customer is there,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
But that's in application logic. So if you don't use the application logic by bypassing it, going right to the database,
Yeah.
you are running the risk of breaking all this stuff. Like you say, this is why a lot of ERP vendors advise you not to go against the database.
Yeah.
And this is why S&P's technology that has that abstraction layer is so powerful and allows you to do exactly what you want. Now, back to your point, though. So I just wanted to clarify that. Certainly, the future is API driven, right? Because the enterprise software vendor, and I'm broadening the discussion a little bit beyond ERP, because
Yeah.
it has to include Salesforce and things like that as well. Is Of course there's a database behind there. You don't get to see it though,
Yeah.
right? It's covered by their API, and this gives them the freedom to change it as much as they want, and drive the cost down on their side while keeping standardization through the API. So this is driving composability. I'm sure you know what Gartner
Yeah.
talks about all the time: composable ERP, best of breed ERP. This is, and I'll broaden that to be enterprise software. There are organizations that are going to be stuck with, SAP, for example, for core manufacturing, let's say. However, maybe HR, or CRM,
Yeah.
certainly, and others, they're going to be looking for other providers for that because, number one, they innovate a little bit faster.
Yeah.
The software is a little more widely adopted. It's more user friendly. There's more interfaces, and on and on. You know all the benefits.
Yeah.
So the days, and I'm sure you remember these, when you went into the data center and it was wall to wall one vendor, pick your vendor of choice, right? It was wall to wall one of those big vendors. Those are, those days are pretty much over. I'm sure there's a couple still out there, but you don't really see that anymore. Everybody's bitten the bullet and moved to Salesforce, for example, right? They're doing that already. So that's really, and SAP is going that way as well with Rise, for example. As it becomes a cloud platform, as it becomes a SaaS platform, you're getting less and less access to the database.
Yeah.
It's just going to be through the API, which is going to control what you could do and allow them the freedom to change the back end. Can I stick more systems together? Can I do something faster, better, cheaper hardware, and on to drive my costs down, but keep it transparent to you, the end user, the customer. So that is certainly the trend. And that API also gives us, as the consumers of that, the way to do composability, right? You're not going to do it at the database level. It's going to be linking together these APIs with some kind of fourth generation language where I'm drawing a flow chart of boxes, get the customer out of Salesforce with an arrow to bring it into another system and into my distribution system, and I kind of graph it all out. And behind the scenes, code is being written, APIs from multiple systems are being called, and everything's kind of being pushed more and more into the back end. All these vendors that were so prominent in the data center are being pushed to kind of be these API providers. I'm not sure how happy they are with that, by the way, but this is the trend. You see it. You see it. Your statements about those other vendors, those customers that are getting now millions and billions in AAR. What are they? How are they doing it? Right? It's through this access to the API economy, composability, the ability to construct now new things by building these little pieces. This is very interesting. And then let AI do it for us as it's coming. Say, I want something that can do ABC, and string it together. This is it. We're there. You see it with Copilot, for example. It's close. We're really close to that.
Yeah, so very interesting. So I completely agree, with your comment related to that. Composability is definitely going to be there. There are going to be use cases where composability is going to matter. One more follow-up comment related to the whole comment related to how these companies are doing that, and their argument always is again, when you go back to the newer SaaS platforms, the way they are arguing that, I'm going to control all of this from the application logic layer level, and they are arguing that, database does not matter at all. You don't even need to have database
Right.
anymore. You can probably do the file system. Why do you need database? That's what they are trying to argue. So now, based on this reasoning, they are trying to argue that, the smart sheet can be an ERP. And my counter always is that, when you talk about database driven rules and databases, it's very, very, very different programming, and you are never going to have that experience from systems such as your smart sheet. Otherwise, ERP does not have a relevance, I guess. So I don't know what you think of that.
Well, I think I wouldn't sell the database, write its obituary just yet. It's there. You may not see it. It may be behind a layer that you don't see it, but it's there because there is certain things you must have. For example, you must have transactional consistency. You have to have that. That's one of the things the database enforces for you,
Yeah,
right? You must have different access paths to the data, so-called indexes, right? So that you can get to the stuff you need quicker. You need caching, right? This is all key services
yeah,
that the database provides for you. Data typing. You're going to really reinvent a date time data type and worry about time zones. This is, I would avoid that, right? This is
yeah,
a solved problem, solved for decades. You don't want to invent this. Transactional consistency, ACID, you don't want to reinvent that. They're very good at that, and very mature in the sense that you could be mid transaction and suffer a complete outage, power failure, the machine blows up, and still have a consistent database. You go back to file system,
yeah,
you're on your own, baby. Uh, so I think the database is still there, even in these SaaS-based apps where you only see the API.
yeah.
There is a database there. There is a database there, whether it's an open source, something homegrown, or one of the big names we know and love. It's there because you still need those things that I mentioned. Uh, so I wouldn't sell it short so quick. You just may not see it though.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, so let's go back to our high volume architecture, I guess. So, what other considerations that customers need to be thinking? So, let's say if I'm a maybe Fortune 100 company, I'm trying to go for, maybe I'm on ECC or maybe some other ERP, and I'm trying to design this architecture that I want to make sure that one of the things that you mentioned is whole time downtime, right? So downtime is critical, but in my mind, when I look at downtime of these high volume, when I look at high volume, in my mind I'm looking at some sort of retail. That's how I see high volume. Now when you look at that, then the way their architecture is going to be that, okay, their architecture from the ERP perspective is probably going to be decoupled, right? Because you are probably processing these orders inside your e-commerce layer, some sort of your POS layer. That's where they generally process these transactions, and ERP is going to be sort of the backend system. At least that's my experience from the architectural perspective. So now, and I don't know if you share the same experience in the kind of industries that you have seen, and what considerations you are going to have overall, and why does downtime matter for these industries, especially if they are going to have the decoupled architecture from the ERP perspective.
Look, it's not just the Fortune 100 and the high flyers that have a downtime requirement. You'd be surprised. It's kind of a matter of degree, right?
Yeah,
The very large companies that have huge mega IT budgets and have high volume, they also have huge infrastructure budgets. So they can throw a lot of hardware at the problem. There are smaller organizations with smaller volumes, but also they don't have the same hardware budget as the big guy. So
yeah,
they still have constraints that they're up against. And remember, you generally don't build your architecture for the one off, infrequent case of modernization S/4HANA migration,
Yeah.
right? You construct it for the common case. What is the common case? It's the AP clerk, the AR clerk, my daily business.
Yeah.
That's what I build it for. The migration workload is vastly different than the day to day OLTP type workload that you build the system for. So it's not unreasonable that it would suffer in a migration scenario, no matter how big or small you are. And then again, like we can't violate the laws of physics, there is a theoretical limit to the throughput that this infrastructure can take. If you're on the big side or the small side, right, you still have that limit. You just might be bigger because you spent more at it. And the little guy is not going to throw all that hardware at it to buy the infrastructure of the 100 billion company just so that they could get through the migration. They have to live with what they have somehow. They can throw a little bit at it maybe, but they have to live with what they have. So this downtime discussion really applies to everybody. Uh, so, okay, back now more to your point. I wanted to make sure it's clear. It's not just the big guys that have that problem. Uh, it might be, and remember, there's more to downtime than the data migration, right? Let's break the downtime conceptually into what I'll call technical downtime. That's the data migration.
Yeah.
And then the business downtime.
Yep.
The business has to do stuff. Once you migrate the data, you're not ready to, go in and start doing your daily work. They may have to repoint interfaces from the old system to the new system. They may need to now log into a different system. Things may have to change. So there are other business type things that have to change once there's going to be some level of verification, surface testing even, just to make sure everything is ready to go. You have to account for that in the downtime as well. So you have to conceptually understand the technical downtime and the business downtime, and now look at it end to end. Like, let's say I have 24 hours. I can afford to be down for 24 hours before my operation in Asia comes online and so on. Fine. Now, if you split it 50-50, reasonable assumption, now I get 12 hours for data migration and 12 hours for business downtime. You see the window starts closing real quick on you, and you really didn't even do anything yet. So downtime minimization becomes important for the little guy as well. Next point, I would not recommend that a customer goes out and builds a landscape for downtime minimization, right? Targeting that need, because it's such a rare occurrence that you're going to need that, and you can't do it on your own anyway. You need special purpose software for this, right? This is what S&P brings to the table beyond just the downtime minimization, is that we have a purpose-built software specifically for downtime minimization on SAP migrations, divestiture, M&A, S/4HANA migration. And it's optional, meaning we may have this discussion and say, Sam, okay, it looks like the data migration is going to take 12 hours, and you can fit it in a 24-hour window, so your weekend downtime is manageable. You're like, no problem. So you don't need to incur the cost of that extra component or the additional effort to set it up and test it and get it working in your landscape. Okay. Now, however, you may tell me, look, I cannot tolerate that level of downtime. I need it in this for whatever reason, right? It's my busy time of year. I have a 24/7 manufacturing. There's a lot of constraints that have nothing to do. The company does a lot more than migrate their business data, right? The business still has to run. So the downtime is not going to work. And it could be because of data volume. It could be because of infrastructure, could be because of cloud. We touched on some of the things that make it difficult. And so now downtime minimization comes into play. And you have to understand, it's not an on or off discussion. It's not downtime minimization on or downtime minimization off. At S&P, there is 11 different approaches to downtime minimization that we tune to your landscape and how your data volume is growing. So what really downtime minimization becomes is an optimization problem of how do we correctly pick over your 30,000 tables, the 11 different techniques, and arrange them over those 30,000 tables to get you the minimum downtime. That's what we do with our software. And then we can do this object-based, this ERP-aware data migration to bring as little or as much history as needed into the target.
Okay, very interesting. So we have a lot of comments, and I don't think we are going to have time to get through all of them. So maybe still, if you get a chance to respond to them offline, on our LinkedIn feed, YouTube as well.
Not a problem.
But right now, I guess, I mean, maybe if you're going to have any sort of closing advice, and if people want to reach out to you for any sort of questions, how they can find you.
Yes, please. That's a great point, and thank you for that one, Sam. Please feel free to reach out. My name is there. My email is just firstname.lastname@snpgroup.com. You can find me on all channels, LinkedIn, Signal, WhatsApp, everything. I'm everywhere. Please feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you about this. SNP offers a system scan, collects over 300,000 data points to help you plan, profile, and predict the outcome in these type of data migrations, be it M&A, S/4HANA migration, and on and on. And we'd love to discuss that with you, show you some of this software, and really, work with you on this discussion. So please feel free to reach out. And it was very, very nice to be here, and wonderful to be with you, Sam. And thank you for inviting me. And please, we're at your service.
Okay, amazing. Again, thank you so much for being generous with your time and insights. Your insights are super powerful, and we are probably going to bring you back.
Thank you, Sam. Anytime. You just ask.
Of course. But thank you guys for tuning in. That's a wrap for this episode. If you joined for the first time, we meet for these podcast interviews every Friday between 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys watch my feed. That's where these are going to be announced. On that note, thank you so much, everybody, for your insightful contributions and tuning in today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.